Hello friends, in today's video, let us understand Forest Conservation Act. This act was enacted in 1980 with the aim to control further deforestation of forest areas in India. We know for centuries, people have been using forest and other natural resources as something which can be exploited. We were using forest and forest resources for many centuries and depleting these resources that we have, depleting the area of forest in India. There was one act existing in India which controlled the regulation of forest, which was the Forest Conservation Act of 1927. This act, which came in the British Raj, was controlling and regulating the use and management of forest in India. So according to this Act of 1927, there were reserved forests reserved for the government, and the government alone can use and regulate these forest resources in the reserved forests. As well as there were village forests in which the resources could be used by the people of the village, and there were protected forests where the use of forest by the local people was controlled and regulated. So there were different categories of forest as per this 1927 Act. But all these regulations existing until then, even the 1927 Act or the National Policy on the Forest that came in 1952, all these acts and policies were seeing forest simply as a resource and using or defining forest in terms of the values that we get from forest, like timber or other values. So it defined the value of forest in terms of the timber production or the timber that we get from the forest. But later, after 1950s, people began to appreciate the value of forest in a more holistic manner. We now know forest is not simply for timber production. It has other values in the environmental system. It is important in the ecosystem. So it was very important to conserve nature, conserve forest in this context, not simply to ensure timber production, but also to ensure the value it offers to the environment, the overall value it offers. So in this context, the 1980 Act, Forest Conservation Act, was brought into action, and the salient features of this act are: this act provides for a higher level of protection to the forest and regulate diversion of forest lands for non-forestry purposes. This act gives more power and teeth to already existing policies and acts and makes the conversion of forest land for other purpose a serious crime. This act ensured that forest lands could not be de-reserved without prior approval of the central government. Reserved forests cannot be de-reserved by the state government. The central government has to make that de-reservation. So it gives more power and protection for forest areas, the reserved forest areas in India. Then this act restricts the state government for de-reservation of forest or use of forest land for non-forest purpose. Only the central government has a say in the de-reservation. The act also provides for the constitution of advisory committee for dealing with matters concerned with conservation of forests. So overall, all the provisions brought under this act gives a proper and consistent protection for forests in India with a view to protect it for the values it offers to the environment. Finally, this act also states some penalties for anyone who violates provisions of this act. For offences in the reserved forest, no person is allowed to make clearings or set fire to a reserved forest. Felling, collecting of timber, bark or leaves, quarries, or collecting any forest product is punishable with imprisonment up to 6 months or a fine of rupees 500. Then in protected forests, there is imprisonment up to 6 months and a fine up to rupees 500 again. And when any crime is committed by anyone related to these provisions, then that produce, any forest produce is illegally collected by someone, then the forest produce together with the tool used for committing that offense may be seized by the forest officer. Suppose we are collecting timber from a forest, a reserve forest, and all the tools that was used for collecting timber as well as the collected timber will be seized. And any forest officer, even without an order from the magistrate or a warrant, can arrest any person against whom a reasonable suspicion exists. So these are the penal provisions that are available with regard to this law. There is provision for 6 months of imprisonment and 500 rupees of fine, and there is a provision for seizing of all the tools and other forest produce that we have collected. So this is the provision with regard to Forest Conservation Act in India. I hope it is clear for you. Thank you.